The restaurant buzzed with warmth and chatter that evening. The clinking of cutlery, the low hum of conversations, and the faint music playing in the background created an atmosphere of comfort for families and couples alike. At a corner table, however, sat a man and his young daughter, their presence almost quiet against the lively backdrop. He was a single father, balancing the chaos of life and the tender responsibility of raising a child who deserved more joy than he sometimes felt capable of giving. He had chosen this place not because it was grand, but because his daughter loved the way the fairy lights sparkled across the windows. It had become a rare treat for them, a break from the homemade meals that often felt rushed. For her, this dinner was special, a chance to feel like other children who dined out with both parents. For him, it was a moment to remind her that, despite their circumstances, she was loved and cherished. The little girl swung her legs under the table, her eyes wide as she scanned the crowded room. Around them, laughter spilled from groups of friends, and couples leaned close over their meals. She noticed that their table felt emptier than most. Just 2 menus, 2 glasses, 2 plates waiting to be filled. In her innocent heart, it seemed like something or someone was missing. When the waitress approached, the girl's gaze lingered on her longer than usual. The young woman moved with an ease that spoke of long hours spent balancing trays and smiles. She wore kindness in her eyes, the kind that children noticed before adults did. As she bent down to take their order, the little girl made a small, unexpected request that caught her father off guard. She asked if the waitress could sit with them. The father's first instinct was to gently laugh it off, to brush it aside as a child's whim. But he noticed something in his daughter's tone, a longing, an unspoken wish for something more than just food on the table. The waitress, taken aback, offered a polite smile and a soft chuckle before excusing herself. Yet the moment lingered. Throughout the meal, the girl kept glancing toward her, her innocent hope weaving itself into the air between them. The father found himself torn. He wanted to protect his daughter from disappointment, but he also couldn't help but wonder what she truly saw. For her, this was not just about a meal, it was about filling a space in her heart, one shaped by absence and innocence combined. The evening continued as plates were served, yet the atmosphere at their small table shifted. The girl's request, though unanswered, had stirred something in the father. He realized that while he was doing his best to be both parents, there were moments when his daughter craved the kind of warmth he could not fully provide. That thought pressed heavily on him, leaving him staring at the twinkling lights outside the window. Unbeknownst to him, the waitress had heard the sincerity in the child's voice and carried it with her as she worked. It lingered like a song in the back of her mind, gentle yet impossible to ignore. And though she hadn't joined their table, fate was already writing its next move. The night was not over, and what began as a simple dinner for 2 was about to become something far greater. The meal stretched on, simple in its dishes, but layered with quiet emotions. The little girl ate happily, swinging her legs beneath the table, yet her eyes often wandered. Each time the waitress passed by, she offered a small smile, as though silently reminding her of the earlier request. The father noticed but chose to remain quiet, his heart caught between admiration for his daughter's openness and worry that she might be disappointed. The waitress, however, found herself increasingly distracted. In her years of serving tables, she had encountered countless families and couples, but there was something different about this pair. The man carried himself with quiet strength, but there was a trace of weariness in his shoulders, a subtle heaviness that hinted at the burdens he bore. The little girl's innocence, her hopefulness, seemed to shine even brighter against it. It was as though together they told a story of loss and love, one she couldn't ignore. When she returned to refill their water glasses, she lingered just a moment longer than necessary. She noticed a father gently wiping sauce from his daughter's cheek, the small act filled with tenderness. It was in those little gestures that love revealed itself most clearly, not in grand declarations, but in the ordinary moments that often went unnoticed. Something stirred within her, a sense of compassion that began to take root. As the evening wore on, the restaurant grew busier, the hum of conversation rising. Yet, amidst the chaos, the father and daughter remained a quiet island. The waitress found herself stealing glances, and each time she did, she caught the girl's eyes waiting for hers, filled with a kind of innocent trust that could soften even the hardest of hearts. Finally, when the main dishes were cleared and dessert menus offered, the waitress hesitated before stepping away. She took a breath and then returned, this time placing not only a menu on the table, but also pulling up the smallest of smiles. She asked the girl what her favorite dessert was, pretending as though it were part of her usual service. The girl's answer, though simple, carried with it delight, and for the first time that night, the table seemed to glow a little warmer. The father, watching silently, felt a wave of emotions he could not easily name. He saw the way his daughter lit up under the waitress's attention, the way her small wish seemed, in some way, to be coming true. Yet he also felt vulnerable, as though someone had peered into the fragile corners of his world. He had worked hard to keep his life steady, to shield his daughter from the weight of what they had lost. And now here was a stranger, unknowingly stepping into their story. Dessert was served, but more than sweetness filled the table. The girl laughed, shared her treat, and for a few fleeting minutes, it felt as though they were not just two, but three. The father noticed it, too, the way the empty space seemed less hollow. And though he did not say it aloud, a quiet hope began to stir within him. The night drew to a close, and the waitress returned to her duties. Yet, as the father helped his daughter into her coat and paid the bill, he caught her eyes one last time. There was something unspoken exchanged in that glance, something that suggested this was not the end of their story, but the very beginning. The door closed behind them as they stepped into the night, but fate had already decided they would meet again. The following week unfolded much like the ones before: early mornings, hurried breakfast, school drop-offs, and the steady rhythm of work. The father immersed himself in his responsibilities, trying to balance the demands of providing while still being present for his daughter. Yet, in quiet moments, he found his thoughts drifting back to that evening at the restaurant. He remembered the way his daughter had laughed during dessert, the way the empty space at their table had felt a little less heavy, and the way the waitress's kind eyes had lingered longer than expected. His daughter, however, had no hesitation in sharing her memories. She spoke often of the nice lady at the restaurant, recounting how she had listened, smiled, and made her feel special. For the little girl, it wasn't just a meal, it was a moment of connection, a reminder that kindness could fill even the smallest corners of loneliness. Her innocent excitement tugged at her father's heart, leaving him torn between gratitude and a cautious awareness of how fragile such hopes could be. It wasn't long before life, in its unpredictable way, brought their paths together again. On a rainy Saturday afternoon, the father and daughter ducked into a local cafe to escape the downpour. The smell of roasted coffee beans and fresh pastries filled the air, wrapping them in warmth. And there, behind the counter, arranging cups with practiced ease, stood the same woman from the restaurant. The recognition was instant. Her eyes widened slightly in surprise before softening into a smile. She greeted them warmly, as though fate had orchestrated the reunion. The little girl beamed, her excitement impossible to contain, while her father felt a rush of emotions he hadn't anticipated. What were the chances? Yet here she was again, as though the threads of their lives had been quietly weaving together. This time, the meeting was different. There was no crowd at tables demanding her attention, no hurried exchanges between orders. Instead, there was space to talk, to share, to notice the small details that might have otherwise been missed. She asked how they had been, and though the father answered simply, his daughter filled in the gaps with cheerful honesty. It was in those candid moments that the waitress, now more a friend than a stranger, saw the depth of their bond and the resilience it carried. They spent that rainy afternoon sharing more than just coffee and pastries. The conversation flowed naturally, as if they had known each other longer than they truly had. She learned of the father's quiet sacrifices, his unwavering dedication, and his daughter's boundless joy despite the challenges she faced. In turn, she shared glimpses of her own life, her dreams, her love for music, and the simple ways she found happiness. As the rain eased outside, the father realized something had shifted. What had begun as an innocent request from his daughter was slowly unfolding into something larger, something that touched the parts of him he had long kept guarded. He had not expected to feel a spark again, not after all the years of keeping his heart focused solely on raising his child. Yet here it was, gentle but undeniable, lighting a corner of his world he thought would remain dim. When they finally stepped back into the street, the little girl clutched her father's hand tighter, her face glowing with happiness. For her, the day had been magical. For him, it had been a quiet reminder that life, even in its hardships, still had a way of surprising him with moments of grace. And though neither of them said aloud, they both knew this reunion was not just chance. It was the start of something new, something waiting to grow. As the days turned into weeks, the encounters became more frequent. Sometimes by design, sometimes by coincidence, their paths kept crossing. The little girl's joy at these meetings was uncontainable. She would chatter excitedly each time, filling silences with laughter and questions, weaving threads of innocence that slowly bound them all closer. For her, there was no hesitation, no fear, only the simple belief that kindness belonged at their table. For the father, however, things were more complicated. He had spent years building walls around his heart, each brick laid carefully after loss and hardship. His focus had always been singular: to raise his daughter with love, to shield her from the weight of loneliness, to ensure she never felt abandoned. Opening himself up again felt like stepping into unknown waters, a risk that stirred both hope and fear. Yet, every time the waitress smiled, every time she bent down to listen to his daughter's stories, every time her laughter softened the air around them, another piece of his guard seemed to loosen. It wasn't grand gestures that drew him in. It was the little things. The way she remembered his daughter's favorite dessert without needing to be told again. The way she paused in her work just to make them feel seen, even in a crowded room. The way she looked at them, not with pity or curiosity, but with genuine warmth, as if they belonged. For a man who had grown accustomed to carrying everything alone, these moments felt like gentle hands reaching for his, reminding him he didn't always have to stand in the storm by himself. One evening, after another long day, he found himself back at the same cafe, not by chance but by choice. His daughter skipped ahead, rushing to the counter with a confidence only children carried, and greeted the waitress as though she were already part of their lives. Watching them together, the father felt a quiet ache. He realized that his daughter's longing for connection wasn't just her own, it was his too, buried deeper but no less real. The waitress, too, found herself drawn in more than she ever expected. She had seen many families in her work, but something about this father and daughter left an imprint on her heart. Perhaps it was the resilience in the man's eyes, or the innocence of the little girl, or the way they leaned on each other with such quiet strength. Whatever it was, she felt herself wanting to be part of their story, even if she couldn't yet name what that meant. The bond deepened in unspoken ways. The father noticed how his daughter laughed more freely when the waitress was around. He noticed how her small hand would tug him toward the cafe, eager for a visit. And he noticed, too, how his own steps had grown lighter, his evenings less heavy with silence, his heart less guarded. Yet, beneath the hope, doubt lingered. Was it fair to invite someone into their lives? Was it safe to let his heart believe in something more than survival? He had carried loss before, and he feared what another loss could mean, not for himself, but for his daughter. Still, as he looked at the smiling faces across the table, the child who trusted so easily in the woman who offered kindness without demand, he felt a truth pressing gently against his fears. Sometimes, the risk of love was worth the weight of vulnerability. The story was no longer about a dinner for two. Slowly, quietly, a third chair had found its place at their table. Seasons change, and with them, so did the rhythm of their lives. What began as small, chance encounters slowly blossomed into something steady, something they could all lean on. The father no longer carried the weight of each day entirely on his own. The little girl no longer felt that an empty space lingered at their dinners. And the woman who had once been just a waitress had become something far more, someone who fit naturally into the rhythm of their world. It wasn't sudden. It was gradual, like the quiet unfolding of dawn after a long night. There were still doubts, still moments when the father questioned if he was doing the right thing. But each time he saw his daughter's happiness, each time he noticed the way her eyes sparkled when the woman joined them, his fears softened. Love, he realized, wasn't about replacing what had been lost. It was about building something new, something strong enough to carry both joy and memory together. One evening, they returned once more to the restaurant where it had all begun. The fairy lights still shimmered across the windows, casting a warm glow of a crowded room. But this time, the table in the corner wasn't just for two. The little girl reached for the waitress's hand, no longer just a waitress, but someone who belonged, and guided her to sit with them. The father watched quietly, his heart full. What had started with an innocent request had unfolded into a love story he had never dared to imagine for himself. Around their table, there was laughter, the clinking of glasses, and the gentle rhythm of connection that no longer felt fragile but certain. For the first time in years, he felt whole, not because life was perfect, but because love had found its way back into his world. Others in the restaurant noticed too. Whispers that once might have carried pity now carried admiration. People saw not just a father and his daughter, but a family forming in the most unexpected way. And as the little girl leaned against her father, her small hand still clasping the woman's, it became clear that the story of a table once too empty had transformed into one that was finally complete. The father knew that the journey ahead would not be without challenges. There would be days of doubt, of learning to blend lives, of opening hearts fully after years of caution. But he also knew that love had already begun to heal the quiet aches within him. And for his daughter, this love meant growing up with laughter, with warmth, with the comfort of knowing that their table would never feel incomplete again. That night, as they stepped out into the cool air, the father looked at the two faces beside him, his daughter glowing with innocence and the woman walking gently at their side. He realized that sometimes love doesn't arrive in grand gestures or planned moments. Sometimes it appears in the smallest requests, like a child asking for one more chair at dinner. And when embraced with courage, it grows into something that changes everything. Dinner for two had become a table for three, and with it, a story of love, family, and the quiet power of kindness that would be remembered forever. If you enjoyed the story, rate it out of 10 in the comments, and don't forget to like the video.